Today in the bunker, we're going to make a trading stand suitable for the Wasteland. Construction on this build is fairly simple, starting with a piece of chipboard that's 50 by 25 millimeters. You can use whatever material you have. I just happen to have some chipboard. It works pretty well. You could use mat board, you could use thin MDF, you could use plasticard, just whatever you have, or you could lay down planks or whatever. And then we're going to build a foam core box kind of underneath, and we'll sheath it and put our uprights and all that good stuff on. So let's get some pieces cut of foam core and get this put together. One thing to note is to use a miniature as your guide. I'm using the Vault Survivor, just the basic standard guy. To his waist is about 25 millimeters, maybe a little above, so that's a good height for a counter. So we're going to work with that. I know that, you know, we're including the base in that, but he stands on the base, he doesn't come off, so it's visually usually works better to include that. I've just got some foam core. This is black. You could use white, whatever color you have, that I've cut to the width of the top. And we'll cut about and I measured a piece off, it's about 17 millimeters high. Maybe 18, but with the top, that'll give you close to 20. And then that'll leave you a few millimeters below, see I cut that crooked, for the legs when we get to that part. So we're going to take some PVA, I'm just going to use some tacky glue, and we'll glue those pieces on there to begin. And just lay a little bead on there. Then just put that on there, make sure it's nice and level, and let that set up. It shouldn't take too long to set up. It doesn't have to be exactly square. This is salvage stuff for the Wasteland, so if it's a little scrappy looking, so much the better. And then we'll just add in some pieces to finish the box. And you could use hot glue for this, it'd be a lot faster, but this PVA, this tacky glue, sets up really quick, so I tend to use that for these little projects like this. When you're done, you'll have a box, kind of an open top box. It looks something like that. So let that firm up a little bit, and then we'll get ready to start adding the uprights. Based on the height of the figure and the base, I determined that I want the overall height to be about 50 millimeters. So what I'm going to do is cut some coffee stirrers, but you could use strips of chipboard, you could use plastruck strips, any number of things. You could use long matchsticks, or even toothpick pieces, whatever. Anything that's the right length, that's vaguely wood-like, or you could paint to be wood-like or even metal, will work for this. That's no problem. So what we're going to do is add these. We're going to put the top of the counter at 25 millimeters high, and that'll leave us, depending on how tall we made our box, it'll leave us several millimeters of kind of a leg for this to be standing on. You'll see once we glue it on there. I just marked out some various markings on here. And I just cut these with EMT shears, but you could use a knife or scissors or whatever you have. And what I've done is made a mark at 25 and then 1/5 up from the bottom, just to give us an idea of where this will go. So let's get some glue on there. You could use hot glue for this, you could use super glue, although you have to watch out. Sometimes it'll melt that foam, depending on the kind of foam core you have and the sort of super glue you have. PVA is pretty much, it's fairly safe for just about everything, so very forgiving medium to work with. And we'll get that on there so that that is at our 25 millimeter mark. Try to make that flush with the edge, because there's going to be another one that'll come up on that side. All right, and we'll just let that set up a bit, make sure those are straight. And we'll let that dry a little bit. While these are setting up is probably a good time to go ahead and put the other pieces on. So we'll put a little bit of glue there and try to get these together sort of as flush as we can. Try not to get a big glob of glue out there. It can sometimes be a little tricky with natural wood products like these coffee stirrers. They're not always the straightest. So a little variation is fine. And if you can not spaz out and do what I'm doing, that's even better. But try to make a nice 90-degree corner there on all four corners. And when all those are glued on, you'll have something that looks kind of like this. So let that set up for a little bit. Again, if you were using super glue, you could run a bead in there and really strengthen that up. But when we glue the top on, that'll give it some more structural strength. So either way you do it is fine. While we're at this stage with the uprights glued on and fairly firm, and before we put the roof on, closing up the ends is a consideration. Here I've used some aluminum sculpting mesh, and you can use this was a scrap piece that just happened to fit, and I just put a couple of boards across to kind of bridge that gap. And then here's a piece of window screen that I just glued in, and for these I just use PVA, but you could again use super glue or whatever. So anything, and then one of these I'll do with just some boards across on the end, so it'll be all enclosed once it's closed up. But just do whatever you think looks cool. And once you've got all of your sides closed in, then it's time to start putting on sort of the cladding of the outside. This one I used wood. This one's got some corrugated metal, which is just this corrugated paper, or you could make your own corrugations. I've got a whole video on how to do that. And I just cut that to fit, put a little PVA in there, and just put that right in there. Alright, so we've got several different combinations of mesh and boards and Wrigley tin and all that good stuff. So I'm going to make some roof pieces, just some simple pieces that fit on top of here, overhang a little bit. We're going to put those together, but we're not going to glue them on yet. That'll make it easier to paint inside here once we get ready to do that. One thing I would note about working with this chipboard, if it's not sealed with sanding sealer, which is something that I sometimes do, but since it's 22 degrees Fahrenheit outside today, I'm not going to do that. I just put the glue on in dots. I don't smear it all over, and then apply this and kind of wiggle that around just a little bit to get a better spread of the glue, but it doesn't spread across the whole thing, so it's much less likely to warp. There's a roof for each one of these. We're also going to make some doors, so go ahead and get those set up and glued on as well. Now the easiest way to make the doors, I'm just going to use some chipboard, but again, as with all of these, just use whatever materials you have or you want. So we're going to make a set of doors. We'll just cut a piece that size and then cut it in half, and then we'll glue them so that they're open, kind of like on this one that I've already did as a test piece. Alright, the roofs are all dry and ready to be put on, so we're going to go ahead and prime all of this first, and then we'll get to painting and detailing a little bit more. So I'm going to try out this new thing. I bought this a few months ago, self-contained airbrush, and we'll see what this will do. Alright, seems to work pretty good. Let's give it a shot. I got some spitting there, that's not good. Alright, so works plenty fine for priming, so I'm going to prime all these, and then we'll put some paint on them. Prime these with the airbrush. I got them out and realized I had not put the doors on, so I had to go back and glue the doors on and then prime those separately. Now to paint these, they're fairly straightforward. Just these doors are generally metal. You could make them out of wood, that would be no problem. Just paint them some generic color and then put some rusting effects on them. Same with the corrugated. Our wood can be either painted or not painted. So we're going to go ahead and put a little color on this and see what we get. Because this one is corrugated iron and old wood primarily, I'm going to dry brush this with a pewter gray. And I'm going to do pretty much the whole thing, because this color works for both. This is part of my aged wood technique. And then the corrugated iron, you can kind of overbrush that. When you get ready to dry brush the mesh on the ends, if you have that, I find it best to support that from behind while you do it, because sometimes that bond is not the strongest on there and you can easily just push that right out. So that's got a good coating all over, so we're going to go ahead and do our next dry brushing step with lighter gray. And what that'll do is accentuate the top of that corrugated iron and give it a little bit of depth. And it'll also give our aged wood a little more definition and start to make that grain pop. All right, once that's done, then just take a whatever color you like and put a base coat on the doors. Like I said, in Fallout 4 they're made of metal, but you could make them out of anything really. And just put some color on there, and then we'll get ready to do some rusting. And while that color is drying on the doors, we'll go back and finish the dry brushing that I forgot to finish originally on the wood. I'm just going to take a very light tan color and just hit that wood a little bit and give it more of a wood sort of shade. And we'll just do that anywhere you want that wood grain to pop. To do the rusting, we're going to build up with burnt umber, some nutmeg, and some raw sienna, and just use whatever colors approximate these. If you look at rust in the real world, the older it is, the darker it is. So this will be probably the smallest area and then a little bit bigger, and if it's very fresh, then you'll have some raw sienna on there. You could bypass that completely if it's just old rust. So we're going to stipple that on. Normally I would use a sponge, but it doesn't get down in the corrugations as well when you do that. So at least for the beginning portion, I'll take a brush and just get some color on there and then just start randomly stippling wherever you want it to be rusty. And just do that to taste. There's no right or wrong there. And if you've built these the way I have, where the sort of the table, the counter is made of metal also, then by all means put some rust on that, and that's a place where probably stippling with the sponge would be a little better. You can kind of control it a little easier. And just like the tabletops, the doors are probably a little easier controlled with a sponge. And again, that's all to taste. There's no real right or wrong there. And then we'll just take the nutmeg and start kind of highlighting that. Here you can use the sponge, because this lighter rust really doesn't necessarily have to be down in there. You could put it down in the things, but it's almost like a highlight. Well, not almost, it really is a highlight. So just do that again to taste. And again, totally optional. That raw sienna as a last one really makes that rust pop a little bit. And it'll dry a little bit darker than that, but it really helps sell that rusty texture. Once you've got your rust to where you want it to be, and like I said, there's no right or wrong there. You can make that as rusty or as clean as you would like. Optionally, also, you can go back. You could put some peeled paint on the wood. Some portions of these really look like they got ripped off of a picket fence. A picket fence? I don't know. So to dress these up a little more, we're going to put some signage on them. Again, totally optional, but just like putting little shelves with doodads on them and making them look a little more like they are in game, some of that you could bypass just to get the effect. You don't have to spend hours and hours building these, but the more time you put in them, the better they look. So we're going to make some signs and plunk them on there. While we're putting the signs together, I'm going to go ahead and glue the tops on. I'm going to put just some PVA on there on the corners and let that set up. The basic structure that I'm going with is just a piece of chipboard or mat board, whatever. I've glued a couple of braces on there that I've spaced. This part will fit down in the corrugation, and those bracers will sit up against the corrugation that's coming up behind it, and you just glue that into place. The one that's going the other way, we'll put a crossbar on there to better engage the corrugations. Alright, so when you make your signs, just paint and weather them the same way you would any other metal bits, or if they're supposed to be wood, do them that way. One thing I found is that this sand gray color works wonderfully for white. White is generally such a bear to try and paint with and do lettering. This stuff is a dream. So if you have access to it, definitely use it, or use a very, very light gray. It generally goes on better than white does. Once your signage is dry, you can go ahead and attach it. I just glued it on with some PVA at the bottom, and then added a couple of braces on there just to help strengthen the whole thing. It's pretty firm. I also went out and found a couple of appropriate images on the internet and shrunk them down and printed them, and then just put those on with some Mod Podge, and that really helps to kind of add to the visual appeal of the piece. And like I said at the beginning, if you have little bits to put in there, little bottles and guns and whatever, by all means add those too. The more you put on this, the better it looks, I think, but this is a pretty good compromise between time and appearance. And if anybody's familiar with Fallout 4 and they see this on the table, they'll immediately know what it is. And there's our completed trading stand. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope it inspires you to make something really awesome, and I hope you guys have a fantastic day.